The crisp, sterile air of the JFK first-class lounge hummed with the quiet self-importance of those within it. But for one woman, that hum was about to become a roar of public humiliation. They judged her worn, comfortable travel clothes, sneered at her simple, unadorned presence, and physically blocked her from the gate. They didn't know the ticket in her hand was more than a pass to a luxurious seat. They didn't know the silent 10-second call she was about to make wasn't to complain to customer service. It was an order that would ground their multi-million-dollar Airbus A380, trapping all of them in a storm of her own making and unleashing a torrent of karma so severe it would shatter their gilded lives forever. The digital chime announcing the boarding of Flight 742 to London Heathrow was a sound Dr. Aria Thorne usually associated with a quiet sigh of relief. It was the final hurdle before she could sink into the anonymity of a 14-hour flight, a cocoon of white noise and recycled air, where the world and its incessant demands couldn't reach her. Today, however, that chime felt like the starting bell for a match she had no interest in fighting. Aria was a woman who moved through the world with a deliberate lack of fanfare. Her wealth, a staggering fortune built on a foundation of disruptive technology and shrewd, almost prescient investments, was a tool, not an identity. It afforded her freedom, privacy, and the ability to enact change on a global scale. But she wore it like a well-concealed weapon, not a gaudy piece of jewelry. Her travel attire reflected this philosophy, a pair of soft grey sweatpants, a simple black long-sleeved shirt, and comfortable sneakers that had seen more miles than most cars. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, no-nonsense ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. She looked less like a titan of industry, and more like a university lecturer heading off to a dreary academic conference. This, she knew, was the source of the problem. The problem stood directly in front of her, a human barricade of arrogance and expensive perfume. They were Gregory and Beatrice Blackwood, a couple whose faces were occasionally splashed across the society pages of glossy magazines. He was tall and florid, his tailored suit unable to conceal a burgeoning paunch, his silver hair swept back with aggressive precision. She was a sculpture of sharp angles and sharper diamonds, her face a mask of bored disdain. Her blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of immovable perfection. They radiated an aura of entitlement, so potent it seemed to warp the air around them. They had been holding court by the gate, their voices his, a booming baritone. Hers a shrill, cutting soprano, slicing through the quiet murmur of the lounge. Now they stood squarely in the path to the jet bridge, forcing the stream of first-class passengers to flow around them. As Aria approached boarding pass in hand, Gregory Blackwood turned his eyes, giving her a slow, dismissive once-over that started at her seekers and ended on her unadorned face. He didn't move. He simply puffed out his chest slightly, a subtle act of territorial dominance. "Excuse me," Aria said, her voice calm and even. Beatrice let out a sigh that was pure theatrical performance. "My dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I do believe the economy line is that way." She gestured vaguely behind them with a flick of her wrist, her diamond bracelets catching the light. Aria held up her ticket, the bold first-class seat 2A, clearly visible. "I believe I'm in the right place." This was where Janice, the gate agent, should have intervened. Janice, however, was a woman thoroughly bewitched by the Blackwoods' ostentatious display of wealth. She had been fawning over them for the past 10 minutes, laughing a little too loudly at Gregory's dull jokes and complimenting Beatrice's handbag. When she saw the confrontation, she bustled over, not to help Arya, but to reinforce the blockade. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" Janice asked, her gaze on Arya, already accusatory. Her eyes flicked from Arya's simple clothes to the Blackwood's designer attire, and a swift, unfortunate calculation was made in her head. "This person seems to be confused about the boarding process." Gregory boomed, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "She's holding up the line." "I'm not confused," Arya stated, her patience beginning to fray at the edges. "I have a first-class ticket, seat 2A. She presented it to Janice. Janice took the ticket, but barely glanced at it. Her focus was on placating the Blackwoods. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Sometimes the system makes errors. Why don't you step aside for a moment and let our other first-class passengers board? I'll look into it for you once things have settled down. Step aside." Arya's voice remained level, but a new cold stillness entered her eyes. "There is no error. That is a valid ticket." Beatrice scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Darling, look at what you're wearing. Do you really think they sell first-class tickets to people who look like they've just rolled out of bed? You're probably holding one of those fake, upgraded passes." "Janice," she said, turning her imperious gaze on the gate agent. "Do your job. Get her out of the way. We have a very important meeting in London to get to." The insult, so blatant and classist, hung in the air. A few other passengers shuffled uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. The Blackwoods were an intimidating presence, and Janice was clearly on their side. "Ma'am," Janice said, her tone now firm, her earlier feigned politeness gone. "I'm going to have to ask you to move. You are causing a disturbance." She pushed the ticket back into Arya's hand. Arya looked from Janice's hard face to the triumphant smirks of the Blackwoods. She saw the other passengers averting their eyes, their silent complicity, a fresh wave of insult. She had been in boardrooms where billions of dollars were at stake, faced down hostile negotiations with ruthless corporate raiders, and debated world leaders on economic policy. And here she was, in a public airport terminal, being treated like a vagrant. A deep, quiet anger, cold and sharp, began to solidify within her. She had two options. She could create a scene, demand to see a supervisor, and eventually, after much argument and humiliation, prove her ticket was valid. She would win the battle, but she would feel diminished by it. Or she could choose another path. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "All right," she said, softly. The Blackwoods took it as a sign of surrender. Gregory smirked and gestured grandly for Beatrice to precede him down the jet bridge. "Finally," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Janice gave Arya one last withering look before turning her attention back to the boarding list, her posture radiating self-satisfaction. Arya Thorne stepped out of the line. She walked over to a quiet corner of the lounge, away from the prying eyes at the gate. The anger was still there, a cold, dense star in her chest. But it was now focused, channeled. They wanted to judge her by her appearance. They wanted to believe she didn't belong. Fine. She would show them. She would show all of them. She pulled out her phone. It was a simple, unassuming device, not the latest model. She scrolled through her contacts to a single entry, a name with no associated number, encrypted and direct. She pressed the call button. It rang only once before it was answered. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer an explanation. She spoke only 7 words, her voice a low, steady whisper that was swallowed by the ambient noise of the terminal. "Ground flight 742, indefinitely, code black." She listened for a moment to the affirmative on the other end, then disconnected the call. The entire interaction had taken less than 10 seconds. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked up, her gaze fixed on the magnificent Airbus A380, visible through the terminal's vast windows, the very plane the Blackwoods had just so proudly boarded. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of amusement, but of absolute certainty. The game had changed, and they didn't even know they were playing. The silence that followed Arya's call was personal, an internal calm before the external storm she had just summoned. To anyone watching, she had simply made a brief, unimportant call. She found an empty seat with a direct view of gate B52 and sat down, crossing her legs with a poise that seemed at odds with her casual attire. She projected an aura of patience of someone with all the time in the world, which of course she now had. Inside the Airbus A380, Gregory Blackwood settled into seat 2B, with a grunt of satisfaction loosening his tie. Beatrice in 2C was already handing her cashmere wrap to a flight attendant, her expression one of someone who had just successfully defended their kingdom from a peasant uprising. "Can you believe the nerve of that woman?" Beatrice hissed, accepting a glass of champagne. "Absolutely no class. The airline standards have simply fallen off a cliff." "Don't worry about it, darling," Gregory said, waving a dismissive hand. "The world is full of insignificant people. The important thing is we're on our way. This Devereaux deal will be the capstone of my career." He took a large gulp of his own champagne, a predatory gleam in his eye. The cabin door was still open. The last of the first-class passengers were settling in, and the economy boarding was well underway. Everything was proceeding as normal. But then a subtle shift occurred. The lead flight attendant, a man with a perpetually calm demeanor, received a message in his earpiece. His eyebrows shot up. He murmured something to a colleague who looked equally startled. He then walked quickly towards the cockpit, disappearing behind the reinforced door. At gate B52, Janice was feeling a smug sense of accomplishment. She had handled the situation, protected her high-value customers, and put the riffraff in their place. Her day was back on track. Her computer screen, however, suddenly flashed red. A single line of text appeared. "Flight 742. Ground hold. Do not close door. Awaiting directive." Janice blinked. A ground hold wasn't unusual. A slight air traffic delay, a last-minute cargo adjustment. But the awaiting directive part was. Usually a reason was given. She tapped at her keyboard, trying to get more information. Access denied. A small knot of anxiety began to form in her stomach. The jet bridge remained attached to the plane. The flow of economy passengers slowed to a trickle, then stopped. An announcement crackled over the gate's PA system. Janice's voice now tinged with a slight uncertainty. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight, temporary delay in our boarding process. We appreciate your patience, and will provide an update shortly." Arya watched her expression unreadable. She saw the flicker of panic in Janice's eyes, the confused murmurs starting to ripple through the waiting crowd. Inside the aircraft, the captain's voice came over the cabin intercom. It was a voice professionally trained to sound reassuring, but the underlying tension was unmistakable. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your captain speaking. It appears we're experiencing an unexpected operational delay from ground control. We don't have any further information at this time, but we've been instructed to hold at the gate. We'll let you know more as soon as we do. For now, please remain in your seats." Beatrice Blackwood let out an exasperated sigh. Operational delay. What does that even mean? "We have a schedule to keep." She glared out the window, as if the delay were a personal affront from the weather gods. Gregory was already on his phone trying to call his office. There was no signal. The order to hold at the gate often included a temporary suspension of cellular service for security reasons. "Damn it," he growled, slamming the phone down on the armrest. "This is unprofessional." 10 minutes stretched into 20. 20 became 30. The mood in the first-class cabin began to sour. The initial champagne buzz evaporated, replaced by a tense, irritable silence. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering refills and placating smiles, but their eyes betrayed a growing anxiety. They had no answers. They kept glancing towards the cockpit, but the door remained shut. Back in the terminal, the slight temporary delay was metastasizing into a full-blown problem. The crowd around Gate B52 grew larger and more restless. Janice was fielding a barrage of questions, her composure crumbling with each passing minute. "What's the problem?" a man in a business suit demanded. "Is it a mechanical issue?" another asked worriedly. "I have a connecting flight in London." A woman cried out, her voice frantic. "I don't have any information at this time." Janice repeated, her voice becoming a strained mantra. "We are awaiting an update." She kept shooting furtive, resentful glances at Arya, who sat serenely in her corner, the very picture of calm amidst the rising chaos. In Janice's mind, a ridiculous but persistent thought took root. Somehow this was that woman's fault. It was her bad karma, her disruption, that had caused this. The airport manager, a harried-looking man named Mr. Henderson, arrived, his tie already loosened. He went straight to Janice, his voice a low, urgent rumble. "What in God's name is going on, Janice?" "The Port Authority is getting calls. My screen says this plane is on a code black hold. I haven't seen one of those in 15 years. Who issued it?" "I don't know, Mr. Henderson," Janice whispered, her voice cracking. "It just appeared. It's locked. I can't get any details." Henderson ran a hand through his thinning hair. A code black was a designation that bypassed all local authority. It was a top-down directive from the highest echelons of the airline's corporate structure, or sometimes even higher. It usually signified a major security threat, a suspected act of terrorism, or a critical fault in the aircraft that hadn't been detected by standard checks. It meant one thing: this plane was going nowhere until the person who issued the code said so. He scanned the frustrated faces in the crowd, his eyes landing on the one person who wasn't. Arya Thorne. He noted her simple clothing, her utter lack of agitation. She just looked observant. For a moment he felt a strange sense of unease, a feeling that the key to this entire mess was sitting right there in plain sight, completely ignored. He dismissed the thought. It was absurd. He had a crisis to manage. But the storm Arya had summoned was just beginning to gather. The winds of chaos were swirling, and soon they would coalesce into a hurricane of consequences, with Gate B52 as its eye. And in the center of that eye sat Arya, a silent, patient goddess of the tempest. An hour bled into 2. The digital clock on the terminal wall seemed to mock the stranded passengers, each minute clicking by with agonizing slowness. The atmosphere around Gate B52 had curdled from frustration into a thick soup of anger and despair. Children were crying their parents, soothing whispers having long lost their effect. Business travelers paced like caged animals, phones pressed to their ears as they tried to salvage cancelled meetings and broken deals. Mr. Henderson stood at the center of it all, a man visibly drowning. He had made dozens of calls to the airline's operations center, to the Port Authority, even to a contact at the FAA. Every inquiry hit the same impenetrable wall. The order was code black. The source was executive command. The duration was indefinite. No further information was available. It was like trying to argue with a mountain. "This is an outrage," a man shouted, slamming his hand on the customer service counter, where Janice was now flanked by two stoic-looking airline representatives. Henderson had called for backup. "You have to tell us something. Is the plane broken? Are we being threatened? We have a right to know." Janice, whose face was now pale and blotchy, could only stammer, "Sir, we are doing everything we can." On board the grounded Airbus, the situation was even more tense. The premium champagne had been replaced with lukewarm water bottles. The gourmet snacks had been consumed. The cabin, once a symbol of luxury and escape, had become a beautifully appointed prison. Gregory Blackwood was apoplectic. He had unbuckled his seatbelt and was pacing the aisle of the first-class cabin, his face a mottled shade of crimson. "Unacceptable!" he roared, his voice echoing in the strained silence. "I am Gregory Blackwood. I am on the board of 3 major corporations. My time is worth more per minute than this entire plane is worth. In scrap, I demand to speak to the captain." A flight attendant, a young man named Ben, stepped into his path. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat. The captain is in constant communication with ground control and cannot be disturbed." "I don't care about ground control," Gregory bellowed, jabbing a thick finger into Ben's chest. "I care about my $17 billion merger. This delay is costing me millions by the second. Get him out here now." Beatrice watched her husband's meltdown with a mixture of approval and emotions. "Do something, Gregory," she urged from her seat. "Make them understand who we are." From her vantage point in the terminal, Aria Thorne observed the entire panorama of human frustration. She saw the C-suite executive from a rival tech firm, a man named Philip Grant, frantically trying to rebook a flight, his face etched with panic. She knew with a certainty that was almost amusing that he was also heading to London to try and outbid the Blackwoods for the Devereux Tech acquisition. The delay was affecting him just as much. It was an unforeseen but welcome side effect. Her focus, however, was on the epicenter of the original sin, Janice and the Blackwoods. She watched Janice's professional facade crumble into raw fear. She imagined the Blackwoods trapped in their metal tube, their sense of supreme importance being eroded with every passing powerless minute. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about deconstruction. It was about taking people who believed their status made them untouchable and forcing them to confront a power they couldn't bully, buy, or belittle. The clock ticked past the 3-hour mark. The inevitable happened. The flight was officially indefinitely cancelled. A collective groan of misery swept through the terminal. The announcement, delivered by a visibly stressed Mr. Henderson, was the final nail in the coffin. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please," he began, his voice amplified by the PA system. "Due to an irresolvable operational issue, Flight 742 to London Heathrow has now been cancelled. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. Please form a line at the counter to discuss rebooking and accommodation options. For passengers currently on the aircraft, we will begin the deplaning process shortly." The words irresolvable operational issue were a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. They meant nothing and everything. They meant we don't know what's wrong, or we aren't allowed to tell you. The news hit the first-class cabin like a physical blow. The deplaning announcement was met with stunned silence, followed by an explosion of outrage. "Cancelled!" Gregory Blackwood's voice was a strangled shriek. He looked as if he might actually have a stroke. "Cancelled! No!" He turned on the flight attendant, Ben. "This is your fault. It's all of your fault." Incompetence. Utter, unforgivable incompetence. The deplaning process was a slow, funereal march. The first to emerge from the jet bridge were the very people who had so arrogantly boarded hours before. Their faces were no longer smug or superior. They were haggard, furious, and defeated. Gregory Blackwood stormed out first, his face thunderous, Beatrice trailing in his wake like a malevolent shadow. They marched directly to the counter, shoving their way to the front of the newly formed line. "Henderson," Gregory roared, spotting the airport manager. I want a private jet, it. Now, I don't care what it costs." Mr. Henderson looked at the man who just a few hours ago he would have done anything to appease. But now, after hours of dealing with the fallout from the mysterious Code Black, his patience was gone. He was exhausted, his career was potentially on the line, and he was in no mood to be bullied. "Mr. Blackwood," Henderson said, his voice dangerously level, "there are no private jets available on such short notice. You will have to wait in line with everyone else." "Wait in line?" Beatrice shrieked, aghast. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" It was at that moment that Henderson's gaze drifted past the incandescent Blackwoods. He saw the woman in the grey sweatpants, still sitting calmly watching the scene with an unnerving stillness. The absurd thought he'd dismissed hours earlier returned with the force of a revelation. The Code Black, the indefinite hold, the cancellation. All of it had started in some way, right here at this gate, with an argument over a first-class seat. It was impossible. It was illogical. But as he looked at the chaos before him and the serene woman observing it, a chilling suspicion began to dawn. He needed to talk to her. He had a terrifying feeling that she was the only person in the entire airport who had the answers. With a new urgent purpose, Mr. Henderson sidestepped the spluttering Gregory Blackwood. "Excuse me for one moment," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. He walked past the chaotic queue, his footsteps echoing a sense of gravity that cut through the noise. He approached the quiet corner where Aria Thorne sat, feeling as though he were wading into the deep, calm waters of an ocean. The closer he got, the more the surrounding chaos seemed to fade into a muted background hum. "Ma'am." He began, his tone respectful, a stark contrast to the way Janice had addressed her hours earlier. "My name is David Henderson. I'm the manager for terminal operations." Aria looked up at him. Her eyes were clear and direct, holding a depth of perception that he found startling. "Mr. Henderson," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I have to apologize for the absolute disaster this evening has become," he said, gesturing vaguely at the disorganized crowd. "But I have a feeling that you might be able to provide some clarity, that my own systems cannot." It was a wild leap, a shot in the darkest of rooms, based on nothing more than a gut feeling and the timing of events. Aria didn't feign ignorance. She didn't ask what he meant. The time for subtlety was over. The point had been made. "Clarity," she repeated, her voice soft but resonant. "What seems to be the issue, Mr. Henderson?" "The issue," he said, lowering his voice, "is a Code Black directive on Flight 742, an order that came from out of nowhere with no explanation that has effectively shut down a multi-million-dollar operation and stranded hundreds of people. An order that I, nor anyone at this airport, can countermand." He paused, taking a breath. "It's a ghost command, ma'am, and I have a terrible feeling I'm looking at the ghost." Aria held his gaze for a long moment, a silent appraisal. She saw in his eyes not accusation, but a desperate search for understanding. She saw a man trying to do his job in an impossible situation. She decided he had earned a sliver of the truth. She reached into her simple cloth bag and pulled out her phone. She didn't make a call this time. She tapped the screen a few times, her movements efficient and precise, and then turned the screen towards him. On the screen was not a social media profile or a photo gallery. It was a live view of a corporate database, a page that Henderson recognized with a jolt of ice in his veins. It was the internal ultra-secure directory for AeroCorp Global, the monolithic parent corporation that owned a dozen airlines, including this one, along with aerospace manufacturing firms and logistics companies. At the top of the page was a name, Dr. Aria Thorne, and beneath it, a title that made the air leave Henderson's lungs in a rush majority shareholder and chair of the Executive Oversight Committee. It was a name he had seen on corporate memos, a phantom figure whose decisions dictated the entire company's direction from an untouchable height. He had never seen her face. No one had. She was famously private, a legend in the financial world, who operated entirely through proxies and encrypted channels. The idea that this woman dressed in clothes worth less than the airport coffee he'd been chugging was the ultimate authority, the final word on everything from fleet acquisition to the hiring of the CEO, was so profoundly shocking that his mind struggled to process it. He looked from the phone screen to her face, his own paling. The quiet observer in the corner wasn't just a passenger. She was the owner. She was the ghost. She was the mountain. The code. He stammered, his professional composure utterly shattered. You issued it. A flight cannot proceed if there is a credible security threat on board, Mr. Henderson. Aria said, her voice still perfectly calm, but now each word landed with the weight of absolute authority. And I was informed of a threat, a belief held by your staff and certain passengers that airline protocols were optional, a willingness to discriminate against and humiliate a customer based on their appearance, a security failure of the most fundamental kind, a failure of judgment and professionalism. I couldn't in good conscience allow a crew with such poor judgment to be responsible for the safety of 400 people at 35,000 feet. So I grounded the plane, indefinitely. Henderson stared at her horrified comprehension dawning on his face. He remembered the scene from hours ago, the smug Blackwoods, the dismissive Janice, the woman in the simple clothes being told to step aside. It wasn't an argument over a seat. It was an insult directed at the most powerful person in the entire corporate structure. They hadn't just been rude to a passenger. They had poked a sleeping dragon with a sharp stick. My God, he whispered, a hand coming up to cover his mouth. I had no idea. On behalf of the airline, Dr. Thorne, I am profoundly sorry. His apology was no longer about the cancelled flight. It was a desperate plea for forgiveness for a sin he hadn't even known was committed. Your apology is noted, Mr. Henderson, Aria said, withdrawing her phone. But apologies without action are just words. Her gaze flickered over his shoulder towards the service counter, where Gregory Blackwood was now shouting at Janice, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. The security threat needs to be neutralized, permanently. Henderson understood immediately. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The power that had been hidden in plain sight was about to be unveiled for all to see. He turned his back now ramrod straight, his face set like stone. He was no longer a harried, helpless manager. He was the instrument of a much higher power. Follow me, Dr. Thorne, he said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Let's resolve this. As they walked towards the counter, the chaotic sea of people seemed to part for them. The unveiling was about to begin, and everyone could sense that the balance of power in the universe of Terminal 4-Gate B-52 was about to be violently and irrevocably corrected. The scene at the service counter was one of pure, unadulterated entitlement, clashing with institutional helplessness. Gregory Blackwood, having been told for the third time that no, a private jet could not be magically materialized for him, was now directing the full force of his fury upon Janice. "And when my lawyers are done with you and this entire pathetic airline, you'll be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets," he bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. "I will own this company, just to have the pleasure of firing you personally." Beatrice stood beside him, nodding her assent. "Tell them, Gregory. They need to learn their place." Janice was backed against the counter, tears welling in her eyes, a mixture of fear and the dawning, dreadful realization that she had backed the wrong horse. It was into this tableau of toxicity that Mr. Henderson and Dr. Aria Thorne arrived. The shift in atmosphere was instantaneous. Henderson's entire demeanor had changed. He now carried the unshakable confidence of a man holding a royal flush. "Mr. Blackwood, that is enough." Henderson's voice was not loud, but it cut through Gregory's tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. Gregory whirled around, ready to unleash his next volley, but he stopped short. He saw Henderson, but more importantly, he saw the woman who had been the original target of his scorn, standing calmly beside him. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. What is she doing here, Henderson? I want her removed. She's the one who probably brought some sort of bad luck onto this flight." Henderson ignored him completely. His focus was on Janice. "Janice," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any warmth. "You are to hand over your airport ID and company credentials. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending a full investigation into your conduct this evening." Janice stared at him, her mouth agape. "What, Mr. Henderson?" "No, I was handling the situation." "No." Henderson countered, his voice dropping even lower, making it more menacing. "You failed to handle the situation. You failed to verify a passenger's ticket. You engaged in discriminatory behavior based on appearance. And you chose to appease belligerent passengers instead of upholding airline policy. You are a liability. Security will escort you from the premises." As if on cue, 2 airport security officers, who Henderson had discreetly signaled, materialized behind him. Janice looked from Henderson's implacable face to the calm, watching eyes of Aria Thorne. In that moment, the entire horrifying truth crashed down upon her. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a coincidence. That woman, that quiet woman, had done this. The blood drained from Janice's face as one of the officers gently but firmly took her by the arm. Beatrice Blackwood let out a disbelieving gasp. "What is the meaning of this? You're firing her. She was the only competent person here." Henderson finally turned his full icy attention to the Blackwoods. "Competence. Mrs. Blackwood is not defined by bowing to the loudest voice in the room." He took a small step forward. "And Mrs. Blackwood, on behalf of AeroCorp Global and all its subsidiary airlines, I am hereby informing you that your tickets have been voided. Furthermore, you are now placed on our permanent no-fly list." The silence that followed was more profound than any shouting could ever be. The surrounding passengers, who had been watching with rapt attention, fell completely still. Gregory Blackwood blinked, then let out a short, barking laugh of disbelief. "No-fly list? Are you insane? You can't do that to me. I am Gregory Blackwood." "It seems you are," Henderson replied smoothly, "and Gregory Blackwood is now a name that will be flagged by every check-in counter and booking agent in our global system. You harassed a fellow passenger. You verbally assaulted airline staff. and your behavior contributed directly to a situation that has cost this company millions of dollars in delays, cancellations, and repositioning fees. This is because of her. Beatrice shrieked, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. She pointed a trembling, diamond-encrusted finger at Arya. This whole thing is her fault. Who the hell is she anyway? It was the question the entire terminal had been wondering. Henderson gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Arya, seeking her permission. Arya, who had not spoken a word, simply looked at the Blackwoods, her expression not of triumph, but of profound disappointment. She gave a slight inclination of her head. Henderson took a deep breath. It was time to pull back the curtain. "Who is she?" Henderson repeated, his voice rising so everyone in the vicinity could hear. "You stand there in your $1,000 suit, Mr. Blackwood, boasting about your importance. This woman who you deemed unworthy of sharing an airplane cabin with could buy and sell your entire portfolio of companies with what she probably considers her pocket change. You were rude to the wrong person." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his next words settle. "This is Dr. Arya Thorne. She is the majority shareholder of the corporation that owns this airline. She is our boss. And when you decided to humiliate her, you didn't just break a rule of etiquette. You gave a direct order to the highest authority in the company that her crew was not fit for duty. She grounded this plane, Mr. Blackwood. Not me. Not the FAA. Her." The revelation detonated in the terminal. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Jaws dropped. Eyes widened. People looked from the unassuming woman in sweatpants to the apoplectic, now ash-faced Blackwoods. The story clicked into place for everyone who had witnessed the initial confrontation. The quiet woman, the arrogant couple, the silent call, the hours of chaos. It all made a sudden, terrifying kind of sense. Gregory Blackwood stared at Arya, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. The bluster, the rage, the arrogance, it all evaporated, replaced by a primal, sickening fear. He had not just insulted a person, he had insulted a force of nature in the corporate world. He had threatened the woman who held the strings to the entire system he so proudly navigated. I, he stammered, all words failing him. Beatrice looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her mask of superiority had crumbled, revealing the panicked, hollow person beneath. "Your presence is no longer welcome at this airport," Henderson said, his voice final. "Security will escort you out." The same two officers who had removed Janice now stepped towards the Blackwoods. This time there was no resistance. Gregory and Beatrice, stripped of their power and publicly shamed, allowed themselves to be led away. They walked in a bubble of stunned silence, the whispers and stares of the other passengers following them like a physical force. They had entered the airport as kings, and they were leaving as outcasts. Arya watched them go, her face impassive. Then she turned to the stunned crowd. Her eyes fell on Philip Grant, the rival executive who was looking at her with a mixture of terror and awe. She finally spoke, her voice carrying easily in the quieted terminal. "Mr. Henderson." "Yes, Dr. Thorne. Please ensure all other passengers on the cancelled flight are rebooked on the next available partner flights at our expense. Upgrade them where possible. Provide them with meal and hotel vouchers. Their evening was ruined because of a failure in our system. We will make it right." She then looked directly at Philip Grant. "All of them," she added with pointed emphasis. It was a final, masterful stroke. She wasn't just punishing the guilty. She was rewarding the innocent bystanders, and in the process ensuring her business rival would also be delayed just long enough. The reckoning was complete, It had been swift, public, and absolute. The immediate public humiliation of Gregory and Beatrice Blackwood was merely the opening act. The true karma, the hard, life-altering consequence of their actions, was an unseen chain reaction that began the moment Aria Thorne uttered the words, "Code Black." It was a karma that wouldn't just sting their pride, but would dismantle the very foundations of their gilded world. Gregory Blackwood wasn't just flying to London for a meeting. He was flying to execute the final stage of a hostile takeover of Devereux Innovations, a brilliant but financially vulnerable British tech startup. Devereux had developed a revolutionary data compression algorithm that was poised to upend the cloud storage industry. Gregory didn't want to partner with them. He wanted to devour them. He had spent months using his firm, Blackwood Capital, to short their stock spread negative rumors and strong-arm their smaller investors, driving their valuation down to a point where his takeover bid was a pittance, an act of corporate piracy. The deal had a guillotine clause, a hard deadline of 10:00 a.m. London time on Friday. If Gregory wasn't physically present in the London law offices of Sterling and Finch with the finalized paperwork, the offer expired, and Devereux would be free to seek other funding. The cancelled flight on Thursday evening was a catastrophe of epic proportions. From the moment they were ignominiously ejected from JFK, Gregory descended into a frantic, powerless rage. Every attempt to charter a private jet hit a dead end. The Code Black incident, though not publicly explained, had sent ripples through the tight-knit world of private aviation. No carrier wanted to touch a passenger associated with such a high-level security alert, especially not on a few hours' notice. Commercial flights were booked solid. He was stranded. He spent the night in a sterile airport hotel barking into his phone at a team of increasingly terrified lawyers and analysts in London. They tried to arrange for a video conference, but the terms of the deal were explicit. A wet signature from Gregory Blackwood was required. The founder of Devereux, a shrewd young man named Alistair Finch, had insisted on it, fearing exactly the kind of last-minute digital chicanery Gregory was famous for. At 10:01 a.m. London time, the deal was officially dead. Alistair Finch walked out of the meeting room, a grim smile on his face. The fallout for Blackwood Capital was immediate and brutal. News of the failed takeover leaked to the financial press. The narrative wasn't just that they had failed, but that they had fumbled. Their stock, which had been inflated in anticipation of acquiring Devereux's valuable patents, plunged by 30% in a single morning of trading. Gregory's personal net worth hemorrhaged hundreds of millions of dollars before he had even finished his stale hotel breakfast. But the true crushing karma was far more intricate, and it bore the invisible fingerprints of Aria Thorne. Aria hadn't just grounded the flight to teach the Blackwoods a lesson in humility. Her actions were, as always, multi-layered and strategic. The Code Black was a tactical nuke, but her real work was happening behind the scenes with the precision of a surgeon. The executive oversight committee she chaired at AeroCorp Global wasn't just a name. It gave her access to a level of data that was almost omniscient. While sitting in the terminal, she hadn't just been observing, she had been acting. A few encrypted messages to the head of her personal venture capital firm, Thorne Ventures, had set a plan in motion. Alistair Finch, the beleaguered founder of Devereux Innovations, had been desperately seeking a white knight investor to save him from Blackwood's predatory grasp. For weeks he had been turned down, his company's artificially depressed stock price scaring everyone away. At precisely 5:00 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, just as the chaos at JFK was peaking, Alistair received an unexpected call. It was from a discreet London-based investment fund He had never heard of North Star Holdings. They had been monitoring his situation. They were impressed by his technology, and they were prepared to make a significant investment, far exceeding Blackwood's insulting offer to stabilize his company and fund its future growth. The only condition was that he had to definitively walk away from the Blackwood deal. Alistair, seeing a lifeline from heaven, readily agreed. The paperwork was drawn up overnight. By 10:05 a.m. Friday, just minutes after the Blackwood deal expired, Devereaux Innovations announced a new partnership, a massive infusion of capital that saved the company and sent its stock soaring. What no one, not even Alistair Finch, knew was that North Star Holdings was a wholly owned subsidiary of Thorn Ventures. While Gregory Blackwood was screaming at a gate agent, Aria Thorn was silently buying the very company he was trying to steal. She hadn't just blocked him. She had outmaneuvered him, protected a smaller innovator, and positioned herself to make a fortune from the technology he had coveted. The final devastating blow landed a week later. The spectacular and public failure of the Devereaux takeover put Blackwood Capital under a microscope. Regulators, specifically the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), began asking questions. Why had the company engaged in such an aggressive short-selling campaign? What was the source of the negative rumors that had seemed to plague Devereaux? An anonymous tip delivered to the SEC in a meticulously compiled digital file provided them with a roadmap. It contained evidence of market manipulation, illegal coordination with unscrupulous financial journalists, and a pattern of predatory practices. The file, of course, had been compiled by Aria's team, using data mining techniques that could uncover secrets buried deep within the web of global finance. The SEC launched a formal investigation into Blackwood Capital. Gregory's assets were frozen. His board of directors, seeing the writing on the wall, forced his resignation. The society pages that had once celebrated the Blackwoods now detailed their spectacular fall from grace in lurid detail. Beatrice, stripped of her social standing, and her husband's seemingly endless river of money, was forced to sell her jewelry and retreat from public life. They lost their penthouse on Park Avenue. They lost their Hamptons estate. They lost their reputation. All of it, every last bit of their downfall, could be traced back to a single moment of arrogant cruelty at an airport gate. They had tried to block a woman from entering first class, and in doing so had triggered a silent, unseen force that had unraveled their entire existence. It was hard karma delivered not by fate, but by a quiet, underestimated woman who they had made the monumental mistake of judging by her cover. The cabin of the Gulfstream G650 was a world away from the chaotic scrum of JFK's Terminal 4. It was a sanctuary of cream leather polished mahogany and profound silence broken only by the faintest whisper of the twin Rolls-Royce engines propelling the jet through the stratosphere at nearly the speed of sound. This was Aria Thorn's true first class. She sat not in a designated seat, but on a soft divan, a tablet resting on her lap. Through the large oval window, the Atlantic Ocean was a vast, wrinkled blanket of deep blue under a sky of impossible clarity. The curvature of the earth was just visible on the horizon. It was a view that always put things into perspective. Down there, on that terrestrial sphere, lives were unfolding dramas, were playing out, fortunes were being made and lost. She had just personally intervened in one such drama, with consequences that were still rippling outwards. Her chief of staff, a sharp, impeccably dressed man named David Chen, sat across from her reviewing a summary on his own tablet. He was the voice on the other end of the code black call, a man so attuned to Aria's thinking that he could translate a 7-word command into a complex, multi-pronged corporate action. The SEC has formally acknowledged receipt of the Blackwood file. David said, his tone matter-of-fact. Their preliminary response indicates a high probability of prosecution. Devereux Innovation stock is up 112% since our acquisition via North Star. Your initial investment has already more than doubled, Dr. Thorne. Aria nodded, her eyes still on the horizon. And the passengers from Flight 742? All rebooked and compensated as per your instructions, David confirmed. We've received over 50 formal commendations for Mr. Henderson's handling of the situation. I took the liberty of flagging him for promotion to regional director. Good, Aria said. He showed initiative and the ability to adapt under pressure. Reward it. And Janice, the gate agent. Her file shows a history of minor complaints regarding preferential treatment of passengers who appear wealthy. Aria said, her voice devoid of emotion. She was a systemic failure, waiting to happen. Her termination will be upheld. Our company cannot afford to have its front line staffed by people with such poor judgment. She wasn't gloating. There was no sense of vengeful glee in her. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a system being corrected, of an equation being balanced. The Blackwoods and Janice were not just individuals who had been rude. They were symptoms of a disease. She despised the lazy, arrogant assumption that wealth and appearance equated to worth. It was a prejudice that stifled innovation, protected bullies, and created the very kind of vulnerabilities that predators like Gregory Blackwood exploited. Her phone buzzed. It was a video call. She smiled faintly and accepted it. The face that appeared on the screen was young, energetic, and filled with a relieved, almost giddy gratitude. It was Alastair Finch, the CEO of Devereux Innovations. Dr. Thorne, or should I say, Ms. North Star, he began, grinning. I don't know how you found me or why you decided to step in, but you didn't just save my company. You saved my life's work. I was days away from having it all stolen by that vulture. I have a vested interest in seeing good work protected, Mr. Finch, Aria replied warmly. Your algorithm is not just innovative, it's elegant. I despise corporate bullies, but I am a profound admirer of elegant solutions. Well, Alastair said, when I get to New York next week, I'd like to thank my mysterious benefactor in person. The team at North Star has been amazing, but I'd love to shake the hand of the person at the top. I'd like that very much, Alastair, Aria said. We have a lot to discuss. I believe your technology has applications far beyond cloud storage. They spoke for another 10 minutes, their conversation a rapid-fire exchange of ideas about data encryption, quantum computing, and market disruption. This for Aria was the true reward. It wasn't the downfall of the Blackwoods. It was the rise of Alastair Finch. It wasn't the money she would make from the investment. It was the technological progress that investment would now unlock. After the call ended, she finally leaned back against the plush cushions. She thought of Beatrice Blackwood's sneering question, who the hell is she anyway? She was a woman who understood that true power wasn't in the clothes you wore or the volume of your voice. It was in the ability to see the whole board, to understand the intricate connections between a gate agent's prejudice, a bully's business deal, and a young innovator's dream. It was the power to ground a plane with a single silent call, not just to punish the unworthy, but to clear the path for the deserving. From 40,000 feet, the world below seemed orderly and calm. But Aria Thorne knew it was a complex, often unjust machine. And every now and then that machine needed a firm, quiet hand to adjust its gears, to ensure that karma wasn't just a hopeful concept, but a delivered reality. She closed her eyes, the gentle hum of the engines, a lullaby of absolute control. And for the first time since stepping into that airport, she allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief. The system had been corrected. Balance was restored. So what's the real lesson here? It's that the person you dismiss today could be the one who holds your entire world in their hands tomorrow. The story of Arya Thorne and the Blackwoods isn't just about a satisfying takedown. It's a powerful reminder that arrogance has a price, and karma sometimes doesn't wait for the next life to collect. It arrives on a cancelled flight with a silent phone call. It proves that character is not measured by the label on your suit, but by the respect you show to everyone regardless of how they look. If this story of ultimate karma resonated with you, and if you believe that bullies should always get what they deserve, then hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have so many more real-life stories where the powerful are held accountable and the underestimated rise.